Michael, are we good to go? Good. Okay, good morning everybody. Just wanted to make sure that we're good to go because as is normal these days, everything goes live streamed to the wider audiences out there. So good morning everybody. Welcome to this event, the third in the series of GCCA CCUS events here at the GCCA Pavilion, on this time on enabling policy frameworks to accelerate CCUS in the cement sector. And I'm Juho Lipponen, coordinator of the CCUS initiative. And welcome to the COP Energy Day, which promises to be a big day. Here's the series of events that we are running. So we are at number 3 now today, and tomorrow also at this same hour, same space, we are going to be talking about the Carbon Management Challenge that will also be spoken about at a high-level presidency event later this afternoon. So come tomorrow as well, and a few in the room have been following the whole series, and we'll have to think of a good special prize for those who collect all the 4 stamps by tomorrow. Wonderful. So today we're going to be talking about policy frameworks. The cement sector is really actively driving carbon capture, and it's great to see, and there's a lot of projects out there being prepared by several companies, and we're going to be hearing a little bit about those, but we're going to be diving a little bit into the ways to make CCUS happen in the cement sector. And right after me welcoming you here, I'm going to pass the floor to Thomas in a moment, who will give an introductory presentation, after which Claude Lauréat will present the panel and the panel discussion with the folks from industry, finance sector, and think tanks, and we present the panel in a moment. But thank you very much for coming, and thanks GCCA for the collaboration on this series of events and collaboration more widely. So Thomas, over to you.
Thank you very much. Good morning everyone, and welcome in our pavilion. I'm delighted to have again this cooperation with you, CCUS, Joe. Many thanks for getting this done. We will do a podcast. We are discussing with Claude to have a podcast and to see how we actually get all these good ideas on good comments from everywhere, because these conversations are very rich, and I think that would be useful to really keep a track and keep a trace of everything. So let me introduce you what we have doing on why carbon capture is so important for cement. So we have made that global commitment back in 2021, which is the sectoral commitment from the cement industry to reach net zero by 2050 with the intermediate objective of 2030. We have defined 7 technologies to get there, and obviously one of the important levers is the one you see in purple there, that is the carbon capture use on store. One can debate the amount, if it's 36, 35, 37, depending on things, but certainly any lever is important, and any lever needs to be pushed forward. The CCUS is essential not only to cement but also to many other industry. This is a synthesis made by the Mission Possible partnership. They have been working on what they call the sectorial transition strategy in various sectors, 7 sectors, which includes 4 of the what we call heavy emitters: aluminium, chemical, steel, and cement, of course. And you see here the deployment of technologies that needs to be made for this 4 sector: power, hydrogen, CO2 storage, sustainable biomass. And this is the sum of what we have and what the respective industries have asked in the respective strategies. And you see the importance of carbon capture. Carbon capture altogether is 4 gigaton for this 7 sector. The good news is that yesterday we had OGCI, and OGCI was very convinced that they have already identified 7 gigaton availability per year in the respective hubs that they have traced over the planet. More important, you see, I think I would like to draw your attention on this little circle with the multiplicator. and you see how little developed it is today. On this true, I mean, let's be honest. I mean, CCUS had a little bit of a bad press some years ago, and I think we have to explain why this is not correct, and how useful this technology is, and how mature this technology is. We had yesterday Catherine Romanac from the University of Texas also explaining on I said demystifying the notion of storage, because people imagine big cave full of CO2 concentrated, etc. It's completely different from that. On how these things is existing, and we need to give confidence to people on that technology, on that know-how. And so cement is 20%, 21% of this necessity by nature. Now, what happens is fundamental at this stage. You see here, this is a summary of what we call all the risk today in investing in CCUS. On today, frankly speaking, without legislation, there is what we call a first mover disadvantage, right? I mean, for those of you that have studied in finance or in business administration, you hear about the first mover advantage. Here it's a first mover disadvantage, right? You have a lot of risks that are not covered and that are not addressed in many cases by regulatory instrument. And you see we have put in front of these risks, this is coming from Professor Bataille from the University of Columbia. In front of all this risk we put, what could be the regulatory response to the respective risks. So you have technical risk, we do pilot. That's what the European Union is doing, for example. I mean, they are paying innovation funds to do the things. Regulatory risk and permitting risk. You need to do pre-approval or specific procedures to accelerate. Financing risk, you do grants, of course. Again, the European Union is giving a lot of money. The IRA system. You do concessional financing. You do provision tolling for infrastructure, etc., etc. So you really have mechanism to actually reduce the risk perceptions and to make sure that the investment in these technologies gets more fluid and gets fundamentally at the end of the day more attractive. And then you have the operation time. And yes, the operation of the carbon capture to date, I mean, we will see the technology will evolve, will make it cheaper, etc. But to date, it is more expensive. And that's pretty much what it was when we look at the wind or the solar energy at the beginning of the century. It was more expensive than the classical energy. Today, we know that a new solar is cheaper in many geographies than a new coal, as they say in India. And you see, you have there possibilities to actually really give some sort of certainty. It will never be 100% certain, but some of certainty, and at least to reduce the perception of risk through, I mean, process subsidies, for example, private-public lead market. So this is green commitment, right? Green procurement. Contract for difference. If you have a carbon price, the carbon price is not guaranteed. You make sure that's Canada has done that. I mean, because they are not sure of the evolution of the carbon price, so they make a contract for difference to give guarantee for the project in Edmonton. Competitiveness protection, that's also through green procurement. And you have also this mechanism with the zero emission credit, tradable support, where you can actually decouple the physical place where you save the CO2 from the credit on the monetization of the CO2 certificates or the coupon that you have. So it's very important that these things are being discussed at the level of government, and that's what we are doing with so-called net zero accelerator. So out of the roadmap, which is a global commitment, we have launched that initiative that consists of going into each country and partnering with the National Cement Association to start understanding how much of what technology is needed, and engaging actively discussion with government to actually see and try to spur, to develop these technologies and to make sure that we are advancing also on projects. And you see we are trying to cover the world with an objective of roughly 60% of the planet covered outside China, and we are also covering China. We are also discussing with our Chinese colleagues. At the end of the day, this is what we want to do. I mean, we have what we call a battle plan. 7 technologies, and for each technologies, a systematic approach on what are the policy asks that would develop the technology, what are the knowledge dissemination requirements. Again, we have a lot of learning on carbon capture, we have a lot of learning on circularity. This could be transferred and accelerate in the countries. What are the projects coming? So try to raise and try to obtain projects so that discussion is concrete, it's not theoretical. We have to have projects to propose for financing, to propose for grants, etc. And of course, financing, right? So facilitate the financing and facilitate the discussion between multilateral bank, global organization in getting the money to do all these projects. That's the mission of GCCA. So in terms of policy, and I will finish with this slide, I mean, we have put there a number of items that are fundamental for the development, in our view, of carbon capture and to some extent to other technology, but principally for carbon capture. Carbon pricing on leakage, right? I mean, we need to have a carbon pricing on, you cannot put a carbon pricing if you don't put a carbon leakage policy at the same time, else you lose competitiveness and you risk to delocalize the emission of CO2. The procurement of the demand signals, the green commitment. The need to integrate the CCUS in the public financing system, so to recognize CCUS as a solution that will count to decarbonize the world, to support the innovation, that's what we said. I mean, there are still a lot of things that needs to mature on progress. To work on CCUS infrastructure, once you have captured the CO2, you need to have an infrastructure to actually make it flow and deal with it and store it. To facilitate and establish all the public-private partnership that will enable to speed up this discussion and facilitate this discussion, including transport. To have the renewable energy, because CCUS consume energy, and we need to have the green energy that goes with this. So I mean, it needs to be accounted into the projection of the grid, and of course, finally, to support the R&D action. Guillot?
Questions allowed?
Yes, question are allowed.
Yeah, thanks, Thomas. Just regarding the emission possible partnership analysis that was done, which is really interesting and revealing. Out of curiosity, are there figures from like closer to this time? I'm thinking namely about 2030. Is there anything in that study that tells what would they imagine that the need be in 2030 time frame?
Yes, there will be something on 2030. I would have to look it to dig it out, but there will be something 2030. The STS is looking at 2030 and 2050. They have actually a scenario on the trajectory on the whole period with different sensitivities on looking at influence of changing certain metrics into the model.
Do you remember at all?
No.
What the okay?
No, but I mean for cement. We were in the magnitude of 45 million ton. They say less than 100,000 million ton, and a minima 30,000 to 40,000 million ton of capture.
Thank you.
The STS is gross also. I mean, our roadmap is net. With considering the benefit of the waste sector.
Okay.
Thank you very much, guys. Any other question or all good?
To work? Yes. Okay. So now we will invite the panelists. Maybe you can go. Yes, exactly. So I will invite Winston Beck of Heidelberg Material, Cédric de Meilhus, Holcim, Olivia Powis, UK Director, Carbon Capture and Storage Association, Yukimi, Shimura, Director at the MUFG Bank, and Rich Powell of ClearPath. And I will stay here because it's easier. And we had really, thank you, Thomas, for this enlightening introduction. And I think it was also useful to remind us of the GCCA roadmap for those who are far away from having their 4 stars because they only haven't been and it's their first event today. And I will start with a question to you, Winston. So Thomas actually outlined what are the key GCCA policy asks, and GCCA has released a policy paper with a whole list of what are our policy asks. But there is one specifically I would like you to provide your view on, So our paper says we need to ensure investment in project construction and operation. And the question is when, and I know you elaborated a little bit 2 days ago, but maybe now we want a deeper dive in policies. But when you want to start a CCUS project in a key country, what are the key aspects of policy making you are looking at?
Yes, thank you very much. So I work for Heidelberg Materials. We are one of the members of GCCA and one of the biggest construction materials companies in the world. And indeed, we are also one of the pioneers when it comes to developing CCUS projects. We have so far announced nine of these projects around the world. And what we are looking for when we are looking for a location where we develop CCUS, we have around 150 cement plants around the world. We are looking for the incentive structures. We are looking, of course, for the availability of storage, and we are looking for the social acceptance. Now, when it comes to the policy framework, I think there are three things which are extremely important. The first one is that we have regulatory certainty and the political commitment. So meaning we need to have transport regulation in place, for example. We also need to have some certain level of planning and coordination to storage sites. So we also need to have the certification, and we need to have the authorities which are capable to do that. Then of course we have the infrastructure. When it comes to the infrastructure, both from the energy side and the CO2 infrastructure, I think we really need to speed up the process. So the permitting is very important. But I think first and foremost, we are of course looking at the potential business case. So where can we make it work also from an economic perspective? And there, of course, what is a key driver, I think, is carbon pricing. So in Europe, we have the emission trading scheme in place, which I would say gives us a long-term perspective for these types of projects, with having a concrete CO2 price, which we know knows when one way, which is up, and it gives us some certainty that they're very expensive, both from the capex as well as from the opex side. So in addition to carbon pricing, we also need a certain level of public support. And of course, in those regions where there is no carbon pricing, like in the US, for example, we also require a bigger carrot. So we require more incentives. In the EU, we have, for example, the Innovation Fund, which is great. It already has funded a couple of CCUS projects in the cement world, and they're currently running the fourth round. The problem with that one is it's very limited, and it's focused only on innovation and not on the scale-up. But same in the US, we have the Inflation Reduction Act, which is actually looked upon very positively, and it really is steering a lot of these projects. But here we get 85 euros per ton of CO2. But the question is, what happens then after the 10 to 15 years when the IRA runs out? There we then don't have a business case because we don't have the carbon pricing in place. So these are things we need to work on in order to deploy these technologies at a wider scale.
Thank you very much, Winston. And I see you are handing the microphone, and it's logic because Cedric is representing the other company on this panel. And Cedric, first, do you agree? And anything you want to add as another need from a policy point of view?
Sure, thank you, Claude. So my name is Cedric Demeus from Holcim. First, a disclaimer: I will leave before the end of the event. It's not because I'm angry or because it's boring, but it's just a mismatch in the agenda, so apologies for that. Fully agree with what Winston has said. I would complement with two things. At the times where we're bold enough to put a CCUS project, full-scale CCS project in place, it doesn't mean that the rest of the actors in a given market will do the same. So we need to ensure our competitiveness and make sure that once this project will be fully implemented and then we will put net zero cement and concrete on the market, we will remain competitive. So in environments where you have a carbon price, for example, in Europe. The policymaker has come up with tools such as the CBAM, the Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism. This is a policy cornerstone, if you want, to build your project on, to ensure that you have long-term competitiveness in implementing your project. That's the one thing. The other one is, and you sort of mentioned it, is the carbon accounting framework. So there's the carbon pricing upstream, but the carbon accounting downstream. Whatever the solution that you are using, whatever the form of storage or the form of a usage that you use for the CO2 that is captured, we need to
keep the microphone, because there is one thing that is also in the GCCA policy paper that you haven't mentioned yet, but that's a nice transition now to this. Our policy paper also speaks about regulatory and standardization framework that create the demand for the low carbon and net zero products. So how do you see it is in different countries, and what can be done to create, as you said, when you have the low carbon product, how do you ensure that people want to buy it? And
right. I wish I had the complete and full answer to that question, because if I did, I wouldn't be here. And of course, it's fundamental, and I don't want to hide behind the lack of demand either. We are part of that process. We have a role to play in creating that demand. Just to illustrate, minimum minus 30% compared to industry standard OPC, and that can go down to 50, 60, 70 in some countries. This is what we can do. Situ today, short of 20% of our concrete net sales. So it means that the demand is developing bit by bit, and no, we don't have the ultimate net zero yet, because the technology is not there yet, but so the demand by us pushing is building up. Second element, we need to engage our value chain. I was sitting at dinner last night next to a very large real estate developer. She was telling me that, having listened to us, she has actually developed her own low carbon cement and concrete specification for their projects. So, actors of the value chain are starting to think differently, are starting to integrate, are starting to listening to us, and reacting to some of the actions we're pushing onto the market. And the third element, I refer to what we in Holcim define as low carbon concrete today. That's just us. So we need to collaborate all together to create a coherent language. We are involved collectively in initiatives such as the IDDI, the UNIDO in Deep Decarbonization Industrial Initiative, where we work on defining what constitutes low carbon concrete and near zero concrete. These are very important initiatives that will help all of us to engage with the value chain and pushing forward, creating this demand. And the last thing is also taking part in initiatives with COP here. There are many events, several events on with the First Movers Coalition that was launched by the WEF and Senator Kerry. This is putting demand with the supply. And these are the sort of initiatives we need to engage on, and it's part of this exercise to build up this demand and work towards it. I'll stop here, Claude.
Thank you, Cedric. Thank you. Stop there, because we also have an event actually on this at 10:30. So we will hear more with Winston and colleagues from Heidelberg. But I will move now to Olivia and go a little bit more into. I would like you to compare two schemes, and Winston referred to those two schemes. So the UK has developed a very detailed and lengthy process in developing business model actually for carbon capture, and this is driven by government, and we heard this yesterday as well on the panel on storage, with active input from industry, but still government driven. And we see on the other end a totally different approach in the US, where they have made available significant amount of subsidy and money, and that has left the model, the business model being developed by industry. What are, I'm not asking you what is the best model, but what are the pros and cons of the two models, and what maybe is missing in one or the other?
Thanks, Claude. Yeah, and I think it was interesting to listen to Thomas's presentation at the beginning and think actually we can tick quite a lot of those points off in the UK. We've got quite a lot of those policy framework points that he mentioned. So, I mean, just to take us back in the UK, this is a third time round. We've had 2 failed attempts at CCS, and one of the reasons why this time round is working is, one, we have net zero in legislation, which massively changed the dynamics of moving forward, but also clear ambition and a cluster sequencing process. So those 3 points together, so we're not doing the sort of point to point. The government very clearly set out that they would take forward the transport and storage first, and then identify the capture projects around those. And that process would share the risk between the projects, and there would be one set of infrastructure there to move forward. So that was quite crucial, I think, in terms of us being able to really sort of have some progress this time. And then, as you say, the government has spent a lot of time with industry developing very detailed business models. I mean, just to put it in context, I've been at the CCSA, sorry, I didn't introduce Olivia from the CCSA at the beginning.
Go ahead. Yeah, I mean,
I'm on here, but yeah. So I've been here just over 2.5 years and started sort of right at the beginning of the cluster sequencing process. So my entire time there has been involved in developing the business models. You know, really good at economic regulation in the UK. We understand it, investors understand it. And so that model has been the quickest to develop, and then business models for each sector. So one for industrial, one for power, one for GGRs, and one for hydrogen. And there's separate targets and ambitions for each of those. And with that clear model that essentially sits behind each of those business models is known and trusted by investors. And it has enabled also, I think, in terms of the regulated asset for the transport and storage, there's things like oversizing the network in preparation for other projects that will be able to come down the line. So a lot of that regulatory framework allows kind of those sensible decision making. The CFD is quite clear through the business model, through the other end, the carbon price would then drive that market if in the UK it recovers and gets to that point. So there is a long-term planning of this whole approach. I would say, though, you know, to put that in context, some of the cons are that we've been at this for 2.5 years and we don't have any projects that are anywhere getting closer to FID, but we don't have any projects that are actually there yet. So it takes a long time. It's very thorough. We only have 8 projects selected in the UK that will connect to the first 2 transport and storage networks, and only one of those is a cement plant, Padeswood, as part of the HyNet cluster in Northwest owned by Heidelberg. So it's a good model on paper. In terms of in practice, we're not really there yet, and I think it will be there, but we've just got to move quickly. There is a huge drive on value for money, and the value for money by the government in terms of identifying which projects should move forward is obviously laudable and the right way to go, but it does mean that meanwhile supply chain costs have gone up, and all that time spent negotiating means that we're not actually building these projects and moving forward and learning by doing. So out of, there were 41 projects that applied for this first phase, and only 8 have gone through. And we did a delivery plan update in the CCSA in September this year, and found that 1/3 of the projects who answered our questionnaire said that they would consider relocating elsewhere to access the infrastructure. So we need to get on and build it, and then I think all this demand will be there. But its speed is really the big con, I think, in terms of this sort of excellent approach, and devaluing, breaking that cross-train risk is a sort of central aspect of that whole UK approach. So the government will kind of underwrite all that risk between different parts of the value chain. So the US.
Thank you. Before you start the US, I think we all want to say, because Cedric, you really have to go. Do you want to say goodbye before you go? No, you just you sleep literally discreetly, which I got totally messed up. But now you can say goodbye. But I think it's nicer if we say properly goodbye and thank you, Cedric.
Thank you.
And everyone understand. It's crazy, COP. So run now. You have your running shoes, so you will be in time.
So on the US, in comparison, a much simpler financial subsidy, tax incentives, simple to understand. Investors again understand and like it. And there's certainty, so you know that if your project meets that threshold, you will be able to develop and go forward. The UK is a big competitive system, and there's a real lack of certainty in terms of whether you'll be successful in that system. It's also fast to implement and attracts overseas investors and supply chain, and I think most sort of importantly will give the opportunity to learn by doing. So the most important thing is that we get going with all of this, and then we learn from the projects that we deploy and all those first movers. I think the cons doesn't drive cluster development in the same way. Doesn't necessarily target specific industries, so the UK has got these different business models and different ambitions for each, and can target those specific sectors. And I think doesn't, so without that cluster approach, doesn't perhaps the cheapest projects will go first, and doesn't necessarily sort of target the highest emitters and moving forward there. But I think that's
a lot. That's a lot. And because I want Rich to elaborate on the US, I think it's a nice transition. And don't hesitate before you speak to introduce yourself, because maybe not everyone knows it and I haven't. So if you want to explain what ClearPath does, that's nice. But I mean, and you know the question, obviously. But I would like you to elaborate on the US scheme and for cement first, but also in other so-called hard to abate sector, although we see more and more now that they are possible to abate, and then on the key policy and incentives that are put in place. So
great, thank you so much, Claude. My organization, ClearPath, is a DC-based family of advocacy organizations. Our mission is to accelerate policies that advance breakthrough innovations to reduce and remove global energy emissions. And so we cover clean, flexible power technology, we cover deep decarbonization, industrial technology, and we cover carbon management technologies. And obviously, concrete and cement covers both of those second two pillars. I think in the US, the situation is very interesting, broadly in industrial decarbonization and specifically in cement, concrete, and in CCUS. The good thing is that this is a very new conversation in the US. We've been maniacally focused on the power sector and to a lesser extent on the transportation sector in the US. Industrial has effectively not been part of the US decarbonization conversation until very recently, and that has pros and cons. It means that the policy is much less well developed than it is for clean power and clean transportation, and it also means that the politics of the conversation are in a much more constructive and bipartisan place, and so you have a very bipartisan dialogue. And it's been more challenging in the other two technologies, but policymakers are really just learning about this for the first time. I'm looking at the picture here of the Brevik demonstration site. I was very happy to join a group of bipartisan group of American members of Congress on a visit to Brevik, incredibly impressive site, earlier this year. But that was absolutely the first time that most of those policymakers were hearing about big demonstrations for carbon capture in the cement sector. So I thought I would just use that very helpful framework to maybe talk about both what we have and then what we need still in the U.S. Thinking about innovation policy, thinking about early deployment policy, thinking about regulatory policy, and then thinking about demand side policy. So on the innovation policy, now between the various sets of legislation we've had over the past decade, we actually stand to have a massive slug of resources into demonstrations of cement decarbonization broadly and CCUS within that specifically. So we now have about $12 billion that will go into a fleet of CCUS demonstrations, at least 2 of which must be in the industrial sector, and I'm quite confident at least one of those will be in CCS and concrete. So think about sort of $1 billion scale demonstration program there. Significant additional funding for for industrial specific demonstration programs, about $6 billion for those. So I'm sure some of those will go to CCS and concrete, although it's an industrial wide technology neutral pool of funds. And then also significant resources both on the non-dilutive grant side and on the low-cost public financing side through our loan programs office for CCS infrastructure generally. So there's quite a bit of resources now working their way through the Department of Energy system at the U.S. DOE, with all this legislation, DOE has now been gifted with resources far in excess of the programs that initially founded the Department of Energy. This is the largest thing they've ever been asked to do. So I'm both happy about that and dissatisfied about how slowly those things are moving through the process, but that just is what it is. They've never been asked to do something this large and complex, and I think that they're executing on it as well as they can, given all of that. But there is more to do, and frankly, while there's this one-time set of resources at DOE kind of going forward on the innovation agenda, industrial decarbonization, cement broadly, everything outside of CCUS, so thinking about electrochemical separation of cement or very advanced efficiency technologies or full building redesign, these are all things that are barely touched right now at the US Department of Energy, especially relative to clean power and transportation in places that we need to go a lot further on the innovation agenda. On the early deployment agenda, as has been discussed, we have the 45Q tax incentive, a leading, very transparent, very clear $85 a ton incentive for CCS, which is there's a little bit left that the U.S. Department of Treasury has to do to get guidance out, but I think it's generally clear and open now how everyone would access that credit. So it's really now up to businesses to develop the value stack and the business model around capturing that. We do have the twin issues that were mentioned earlier with 45Q, that one, the credit only pays out for 12 years, and ideally the lifetime of these projects will be significantly more than 12 years. I don't think many people would invest billions in something that would only pay out for 12 years. And two, the life of the credit technically ends in 2033. So projects that start construction after 2033 won't necessarily be able to capture the credit. So the next thing I think in this is to further reform that credit. The leading proposal from Republicans in the U.S. House, which is the most ambitious carbon capture and sequestration incentive, would fix both of those things. So they would make the credit pay out over 20 years, and they would make it a permanent credit. So it would never go away. It would exist perpetually. But I think that's sort of the next thing there. On the regulatory side, we do theoretically have a regime to sequester the CO2 in the U.S. It's called our Class 6 permitting regime. To date, this administration has not granted a single actual permit for someone to do Class 6 sequestration. So everyone can read into that what it is. This administration says it is for CCS, and it has not yet actually permitted one new permanent storage project. Ironically, it's actually easier to do CO2 sequestration for enhanced oil recovery right now in the U.S. than it is to do permanent geological sequestration. This is obviously a major gap, and there's a lot of pressure on the administration to move more quickly on this. Very lastly and quickly, on the demand side signals, this is the place where the U.S. really has not made significant policy to date. We have a small pool of money at the General Services Administration to start doing clean materials procurement by the U.S. federal government, which is a major buyer of concrete and cement alongside steel and all the other industrial commodities, but it's a relatively modest thing, and it's technology neutral. It's not really cement specific. The good news is we're very close to seeing the introduction of bipartisan legislation in the U.S., which would set up a proper clean cement and concrete procurement mechanism in the U.S., alongside greatly scaling up the innovation support for that as well. So we're very excited to see. We saw a number of the senators that are working on that speak about the prospects for it at the first big industrial decarbonization summit we helped host in DC earlier this year, Senators Tillis and Coons in particular, and we're excited now about seeing them take the next steps and actually introduce legislation hopefully very soon. So I'll end there.
Wow, thank you. That's quite enlightening, and it's nice. She's ready already, and obviously she's the only one who hasn't spoken yet. So so Yukimi, you are the first finance representative sector. Tomorrow we have some more, but you are the first on this pavilion, and we heard a lot, about incentive financing credits and so on. Now, what is your perspective from a finance group, and what would you see as a finance group the policy needs to get CCUS take off the ground in the cement sector?
Claude, thank you so much. For those of you who are not familiar with MUFG Bank, we are actually the biggest bank in Japan. Have a global operations in the US, in UK, and in the EU and other areas, but specifically very strong in presence in Asia. And I've been in the CCS, or actually CCUS, over now nearly 15 years or so. Before, I was actually energy and environmental consultant, and working also for the carbon credit schemes. So I'm quite familiar with the certification schemes, etc. as well, apart from the regulatory issues that the CCS world always have and experience with. But today I was invited to talk about the business models or the financing aspects, especially for the incentive scheme. Now, Winston, I fully agree with you that we do need a long-term commitment from the government, including the incentive schemes. And it's beautiful to have the IRA from the US, but then what would happen afterwards? So that's just the first thing we look for, especially for the offtake term agreement. So we actually recently published a transition white paper. And then there are three things we expected from not just the CCUS, but also for the new technologies that we will finance in the future. One is the legitimization. It's a long-term commitment from governments. Without that, it's not possible for us. Especially, we can't take the political risk, for instance, etc. Second, incentivizations, and this is, I guess, why we are here today to talk about. And there are enough. Probably the subsidies provided for the R&Ds, for instance, the EU Innovation Fund, and I saw DOE program as well. And here in Japan, we also have a NEDO and METI and all the other programs. One of those things that we are having a problem is, I guess, with maybe it was Cedric mentioned, or maybe it was Winston you mentioned. They do for the funding for the R&D, but not for the scale up. And so we do actually need additional capital to help. Maybe IRA would do. Maybe there are other ways to do it. So we definitely need the governments to support this. Now, some countries have a basic infrastructure for CCS, or the capture or transport to the storage. Some countries do not even have pre-established infrastructure, including Japan, and that is when the difference comes in when the government subsidy. When we talk about government subsidies, so let's say we have a whole pot of a certain amount of money. Of course, the government subsidies can go into the infrastructure mainly, or for countries that already have a basic infrastructure, maybe go into more market-based mechanism. So those are the things that probably we need to work around, and also we need to keep talking with the governments what we need next. Even if we have a basic infrastructure, we need to make sure that we have enough cash flow. Enough money to come in, so that we have a positive cash flows. One thing that we mentioned is that subsidy is good for the the capex, but we also need the support from the OPEX. So from that perspective, CFD from the UK is superb for us. We not only as a system, it works for us to oversee the long-term commitment from the government and security for the income, but also there's an experience already with the wind farm. So having a new system is always scary for us, for financiers, but having already the experience with the wind business, I think we feel more comfortable how the CFD actually works. So that gives additional assurance for bankers and the investors as well. Now, the last thing that we say is the evidence with integrity. Now, the world is moving so fast that the technology development goes rapidly. We planned something 5 years ago, and they may actually as most later. So we need to make sure that whatever the new technologies that's actually coming in, especially for the capture technology when it comes to the CCUS, it's up to date. And also that's the aspects that we always look for. And the last thing is the demand signal. That's what everyone is talking about. Someone has to pay for these additional costs. If the government can provide subsidies, short-term, long-term, perfect. But then government is not, the grandfather for everyone, can provide you money, forever. Subsidy ends at one point. We know that. So we need to make sure there is enough demand signal, and it's not just having a procurement scheme asking for the government, but that usually goes first. But some countries actually start talking about working on the building code, for instance, that will require to add or ensure that they would procure the X amount or X percentage of green concrete or cement or whatever the term you use. So you need not just an incentive scheme for the CCUS, but also another incentive schemes or another has to do everything with carbon pricing. There might be a little bit of a risk involved. So that's the additional points I'd like to highlight when we're talking about the carbon pricing.
Thank you very much, Yukimi. I saw a lot of nodding, Winston, and we are approaching the end. I mean, it was a very rich ideas that you all provided us. But Winston, it was one thing I haven't heard much, and I heard a lot about this need for long term and what after the grant and so on. What about carbon pricing? And maybe Winston, that's one for you. Can carbon pricing provide the help that will be needed in the long run?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we see it in the EU, where we have the emission trading system. As I mentioned before, I think that's it's generally a good system. It gives us some long-term predictability when we are planning. It's clear, as mentioned, that we need to have CAPEX funding and OPEX funding at the first 10 to 15 years. But it's also clear that we cannot rely on public subsidies forever, right? And it must be absolutely the goal of the industry to make these technologies work from an economic standpoint and to make them viable and commercially sensible. And that is, I think, what we are all aiming for. But for that, we need to work on the supply side and we need to work on the demand side, as was just being mentioned. I think we need to have a carbon pricing. Actually, here at COP, it's being discussed about moving at some point to a global carbon pricing, but I assume we are still very, very far away from that. So I think we should push for regional carbon pricing systems, as we have in the EU, as we have in Canada, for example. We are now also seeing it being developed in China. Actually, Turkey has said they want to set up such a scheme until 2026. But if we have regional carbon pricing systems, it's clear that they need to come need to be combined with a system to protect those industries which are in the area of carbon pricing, such as the CBAM in the European level. But we also need to work on the demand side, as was mentioned before, in order to make sure that these products also come with a green premium, and that there is awareness for that from the consumer side.
Thank you. Any of you want to add anything? If not, I think we have 5 minutes if there is a question from the audience. Yes.
Thank you. Santeri Palmäki from the Women Business Coalition. I think it might have been Cedric that mentioned that there are already some companies that are willing to pay a green premium, but maybe, Winston, if you can, do you have any archetypes of certain types of real estate developers or certain types of customers who are already willing to pay a green premium?
I guess that's for you, Winston.
Yes. I mean, the products are already on the market partly. I mean, we are offering already sustainable products. We are working on all different types of concrete, which comes with a reduced carbon footprint of up to 66%, and we also have different product offers with recycled content. And of course, there is demand for these types of products. I think also our customers are increasingly aware. They are also increasingly working with companies like SBTi, for example, to get their net zero and 1.5 validation. So I think there is an increasing demand and drive towards sustainability along the whole value chain in the constructions, and be actually a leading example. But here, when you look at public tenders, for example, there are very few where there are sustainability criteria included. So I think we do need to work also really, what was said before, on the standards and on the building codes to make sure that these types of aspects, the embedded emissions and the operational ones, also are being included, and that we move from a niche market to a broad market.
More questions? If not, Gio, yes?
Thank you, and thanks everybody. Really great panel. Rich, you mentioned the Class 6 permitting in the United States. You mentioned that not one single permit has been so far issued, and I think there's between 100 150 applications in at the EPA. So my question is, how worried are you that this will become a real bottleneck? And is it simply about basically not having enough of people who deal with these applications, or are there? What's your take on what the issue is, and how can it be solved?
Well, thanks so much for following up on that. So, the EPA has issued these permits before, and so it is capable of doing it. It issued them toward the very end of the Obama administration. It issued the first two. It did take the EPA 6 years to do the reviews for the first ones, so which is not, an acceptable, meaningful time frame. So we have two big ways to solve this problem. Way one is there's a process in the U.S. called primacy, where the EPA can delegate the authority to run this program to states. It has so far successfully done that in 2 states, and we've seen huge acceleration as soon as the states take that over. It's not about the states cutting corners in any way. The states have geologists who are much more familiar with the local conditions. They can process things much more quickly. There's less bureaucracy generally. So getting more states under this primacy is a good first move. EPA has said it's going to do that. This EPA has said it's going to do that with Louisiana as sort of the next one, but that process also is taking a long time. So we'll see. And then on getting them moving through the federal process, there certainly is just a human capacity issue at EPA. They have an unprecedented wave of applications for this. And then the other piece is that we simply, CCUS sequestration sites are well characterized in the U.S., maybe more so than any other geography, and yet there are still relatively few people in the country that are geologists and folks with a lot of the engineering expertise to competently administer all of these. And so we're sort of working with one pool of humans, whether the states are running them or the federal government is running them, there's kind of one pool of consultants and experts to be consulted on all of this. And so just scaling up the human capacity to actually process all of these is another big part of the challenge. And lastly, there's just simply a political will part of the challenge. To be very transparent, there are folks who don't want the current EPA to issue one of these permits that are very vocal with the administration. So the administration just needs to push through that and start getting these things done.
Thank you, Rich. Thank you, everyone. Any burning comment, Olivia, Yukimi? You want to have a closing? 30 seconds? Yes.
Very, very short. Carbon pricing using EU ETS works because EU ETS has been there since 2008, and the market is already established. We've seen the prices fluctuation, but we know how it operates. New ETS or any other new carbon trading mechanism, it's going to be a nascent. It's very difficult for financier to really evaluate the any income coming from the trading mechanism, just because there's no experiences or no previous records. So that's just the EU is really a unique case. It may actually not work in the other countries immediately. It may work in the future after having a long term of operations of a trading scheme.
Thank you. And Olivia, sure.
I mean, I think just to build on that, for us in the UK, it's an aligned ETS and a stable ETS. We've seen our ETS price plummet, and it's very clear that for us we need to align it with the EU ETS and to have a CBAM in place and then a low carbon products market alongside. They all need to work together to be able to provide a long-term market.
So thank you very much, Gio. It's a John event and you have done them all. So first, big thank you. I think we can give a round of applause to our panelists. I think it was a great event. If you want your 4 stamps or 3 stamps, there is a 4th event of the series tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock. You know the way, you know the place. It's building on the carbon management challenge that is announced today, and we have quite important speakers on stage, and I think we will have a very rich debate. And if you are interested in low carbon procurement and what's being done, please stay in 20 minutes, and that's why I'm rushing up. We have an event with our member company Heidelberg Material, so please stay. There is another event here in 20 minutes, and that's going to be nicely linked to this part of the discussion we had. So thank you very much again, and have a great day at COP.